Welcome to My Life, Tanya Applied, with Rabbi Simon Jacobson, a journey into the deepest teachings of Torah and their application to our personal, emotional, and psychological lives.
A good yontif and a gmar chesima teva. We continue our journey in the life-changing Sefer Tanya. Being that we're coming from the Yom HaKodesh, Achaz B'Shana, the holiest day of the year, Yom Kippur, we'll begin the talk and discussion about Yom Kippur, which Hashgacha Pratis happens to be connected to the themes that we're learning in Tanya. This program is made possible by Rena Lights LLC and is in honor and memory of Rabbi Yosef Halevi Weinberg Olav Shalom, Rabbi Moshe Pinchas HaKohen Katz Olav Shalom, Rabbi Yael HaKohen Kan Olav Shalom, and it's in schus and merit of Rabbi Zev Yecheskel HaKohen and Risha Katz Le'erich Yomim V'Shanim Tevis for many long, healthy years. So Tanya, we finished in the last year, in the last class, we finished Perek Chav Beis. I'm about to enter into Perek Chav Gimel, the 23rd chapter. The theme essentially is that all Torah mitzvahs is encompassed in the first two of the Ten Commandments, Anochi and La'yir Lecha. They both express the concept of divine unity, except in two different contexts. One is the unity, Anochi Hashem Lekecha, that God is the only reality, and La'yir Lecha Lekim Acherim, that nothing else but God. That there's nothing devoid of God, and anything that, so to speak, has its own identity is Lekim Acherim. This is the central theme of all Torah mitzvahs, which is of course critical to understanding what he began discussing at the beginning of chapter 20 to explain how Karav Elecha Hadover Ma'id Beficha B'Lvavcha La'asese Elecha Hadover Ma'id, to each person, to each Jew, not just when there's a threat to our faith, and then even a Kal Shebekalim and Peshi Yisrael, even a person who's not at any particular level, will stand up in an emergency situation and say, I am with God. But every mitzvah, every detail of our lives is really an expression of divine unity. And every mitzvah sesa is an expression of divine unity, and every mitzvah sleisa is an expression of the non-duality of godliness. That there's nothing outside, that there is no other reality. So in chapter 20, he laid out the idea of divine unity, that everything is like the speech of Hashem. All is created by God's speech, and therefore the creation is completely nullified in the presence of that speech. In chapter 21, he explained even furthermore that the very speech itself is not outside of God, it's all part of God's reality. And then in chapter 22, he explained how anything contradicts that is a form of Elikim Acherim, that due to the concealments of the divine, it allows an independent consciousness to emerge, but that independent consciousness is all part of the divine plan. But when a person is haughty, arrogant, that's compared to idolatry, because it's an identity outside of godliness, where the only true reality is godliness, as we learned at the end of chapter 22. He said, since the divine energy within it is concealed to the point of galus, displaced, and therefore that state is not bottled, is not nullified, is not completely subjugated to the divine unity, to the point that he says, I am me and nothing else. So therefore that's the level, and that's why he calls it that the feeling of something outside of godliness. So just like mitzvah sesa express anochi, the mitzvah sleisa express la'yir lecha. And that's how he concluded chapter 22. And that's why anything that does not have that bittul, that complete sense that we are just an extension of, an expression of godliness, is a kfira b'achdusei hamitis, that which, because in truth everything is nullified in his presence and dedicated to his will, and he's the one that sustains everything that exists. That's the end of chapter 22. Chapter 23, he's now going to explain how all Torah mitzvahs, and especially Torah, reflects that unity. And then in chapter 24, he's going to explain how Leisa, all the negative mitzvahs that would, if you did it, God forbid, would defy God, expresses the element of Avodah Zarah, Le'yeh l'cha l'kim acherim. But as I said, let's connect this to Yom Kippur. And then we'll go back to the very discussion and you'll see the connection. Yom Kippur, the Pasuk says twice, Pasha Tetzav and Pasha Achrei, Achaz B'Shana, which literally means one day in the year. One unique day, once a year. And that indeed is the Yom Shabbos Shabbosin, the Shabbos of all Shabboses, Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year. But when you look in Tosfos, and a number of places explain the Chassidus, that Achaz comes to explain more than just it's a singular day, that it reflects singularity. It reflects something that is unique. In the language that we say in the Shainis, Yechido le'yachdecha, that there's nothing but godliness. So when you have 7 days in a holiday, and outside of Eretz Yisrael 8 days, so there's a structure of 7. But where do we find the expression of Hashem Echad, total unity? That's Dafke Yom Kippur. So Achaz B'Shana expresses that unity. And indeed, we see the Shalom writes, when we say at the end of Ne'ilah, Shema Yisrael, when we said at the end of Ne'ilah, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, and 3 times Baruch Shem, and 7 times Hashem Elokim, which is all an expression of the divine unity, that nothing is outside of godliness. It's the only reality that a person has to be mechaven, has to have intention as if they're giving their lives away, Mesiras Nefesh Mamish, to Hashem. If you think about it, it's similar to what he said. It begins in Tanya, chapter 20, that he wants to express that it's not just when we're challenged, when there's a threat, either bow to an idol or we'll kill you, that a Jew will give his life. But his whole being, and this is expressed in Yom Kippur, Itzumi Shel Yom Mechaper, Itzumi, the very essence of the day, but it also means the essence of God and the essence of the soul connected. Because that's what Moshe Rabbeinu achieved on Yom Kippur. As we said in the beginning of Yom Kippur, Salachti v'yimin Hashem 3 times, Salachti kidvarecha, that even though the Jews had sinned, what sin? La yilcha l'kim acherim, Avodah Zarah, Egel Azov. Moshe was able to gain forgiveness because there's a connection that's deeper, even than a sin as great as Yareg V'Yaver that you have to die for. Because there's that Yechida L'Yachdecha, that intrinsic and essential bond where there's a oneness. So we know that there are 5 levels of the neshama, as the Medrash says. Chamisha Shemus Nikra Allah, 7 names that the soul has: Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, Yechida. What are the differences between these 5? So Nefesh is as the soul is vivifying and energizes, you could say, biological life. The fact that the soul simply gives us life. Without a soul, God forbid, the body is lifeless. The soul gives life. The heart beats, the brain works, everything else is functioning. Biological life. Ruach is not just that you're physically alive, but also emotionally alive. Reflects the world of Yetzirah. If we say that Nefesh is the world of Asiyah, like when we say Ata nefachta bi v'ata meshamar b'kibi, that's Asiyah. Ata Yitzarta, which we say before that, is the world of emotional life. Neshama, Ata Barasa, the world of Bria, is intellectual life, Chabad. So in the spheres, it would be, Nefesh would be Nihi and Malchus, Ruach would be chagas, chesed, gvura, teferes. So Nehi is mostly the behavioral, the biological, the actionable. The midas is in chagas. And the moichin, the intellectual, the cognitive, is neshama. But those are what we call koiches primim. Those are internal, immanent faculties. They're localized. We're conscious of them. But then there's the supraconscious faculties. We'll call them the transcendent ones. And in that, the first is transcendence, chaya. Chaya is not referring to a particular level in the spheres. That would be arich, the lower level of keser. And then yechida is the higher level of keser. Like we said, yechida liyardacha. So here's the interesting thing. Every day, we say 3 prayers. Shachris min Chamayrev corresponds to nefesh, ruach, neshama. On Shabbos and Yom Tov, we add a 4th prayer. We also access chaya, musaf. And once a year, achaz b'shana, 5 prayers. We include ne'ilah, yechida. So even though there's yechida shabenefesh in each person all the time, but Yom Kippur becomes revealed. That's what Moshe was able to accomplish through his 40 and then 80 days of davening to Hashem, where he drew out from Hashem the Yud Gimel Midas Harachimim, the 13 attributes of divine compassion, and was able to reach the Yechida, which is connected to the Yachid of divine unity, the utter unity that precedes existence, precedes structure, precedes 7, precedes all numbers, total seamless unity. The Eitz Chaim says, when it explains what is a neshama, so it says, Nitzutz Echad Boirach, which is called Yachid, manifests itself in a Nitzutz Echad Nivra, which is called Yechida. So Yechida Sheba Nefesh is touching the Yachid. Not just Echad, but Yachid. Utter unity, utter singularity. And that's what radiates on Yom Kippur. So the Anochi Hashem Elokecha and La'yir Lecha, Matan Torah, on Shavuos, was when it was given, but it was not challenged until the Chet HaEgel, and then that was challenged. It was a betrayal, the violation of La'yir Lecha. Yom Kippur is the tshuva on all of this, and that's when Moshe receives the second luchas. Yom Chasanos is Matan Torah, but now the second luchas represent the repair after that violation of the total connection to Achdus Hashem. So you see that the themes that we're discussing here in chapter 20 and on, especially in the last chapters, 22, and now we're going to 23, are all about this. It's about a Jew living a life, not like as if, okay, I live my life, but I dedicate my life to godliness. To Hashem, Kol Masachel Hashem Shemayim, Chol Drachecha De'ehu. Beautiful. It's much more than that. We are actually manifesting and personifying divine unity in existence. That's what Hashem wanted. When we say Nesava Kadosh Baruch Hu Liyis Leis Baruch Dira B'Tachtenim, God desired to have a home in this world. A home means we are completely comfortable. That the Achdus Hashem and the Yochid is completely comfortable in this world. In Golos, we're a world that either defies God, like we said, Aniva Avsiate, me and nothing else. A world that does not recognize, or definitely does not integrate godliness in everything they do, is essentially the Elikim Acherim. It's exactly what it is. The Kavanah is Adira Leis Baruch means that not just as a guest and not just temporary, Adira is when you come a home, a true home, is you're completely one with that home. You're completely there in a revealed way, without your defenses up, without any filters. You, in your essence, is revealed. And that's what the Eibishter wanted. So we give the mashal of a dira of a human being. But dira leis baruch, leila atzmuse, itzume, yochid liyachdecha, and that's what neshamas begufim, what we achieve in this world. And Yom Kippur is the ultimate day of that achas b'shana, that achdus. Now, can a person 24/7 be that cognizant? Even if not, but what we're asked to be is on Yom Kippur. We dedicate that one day, and especially at the end of the day, to complete connection, just you and God alone, nothing else. No duality at all, only oneness of godliness. And then, qualitatively, we try to replicate that. We try to manifest that in all our days that follow. In Tavshin Chav Beis, 1961, Simchas Torah, those years the Rebbe, Lubavitcher Rebbe, would teach a niggin. Second night of Hakaf is Leil Simchas Torah, so after the dancing, come down like 4 or 5 in the morning, stand on a table or on a box, give l'chaim to all those that would add and increase in learning Chassidus, and then he would tell a story and teach a niggin. This went on for around 10 years. From Tavshin Tez Zayin through Tavshin Chav Daled. Basically 1954 through 1964. Or 63, I should say, because it wasn't yet 1964. From approximately 10 years. In the year 1961, Tavshin Chav Beis, the Rebbe taught the niggin Anim Zmiris. You may have heard the niggin. Anim Zmiris Vishirim Eroig Ki Elecho Nafshi Saroig. And I wasn't there, I was a little child at the time, but I heard that for people it was a Gili Elikus, it was like something extremely divine. Before he taught the song, the Rebbe told the story. He said this niggin was heard about from a chassid who was singing when Mitzvah Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur services ended, Ne'ilah, they daven Ma'ariv. So then everyone goes home, says Good Yontif, goes home and eats a Suda, a Yom Tov meal. So Yom Kippur, tonight. This chassid was so enraptured and so completely consumed with the Yom Kippur Achdus experience that he continued singing. And what song did he sing? Anim Zmiris, to the point that the next morning when they came for Shachas, he was still in his talis and his kittel, going around the bima singing this niggin. But you see from this is how it captures Yom Kippur. When a person becomes completely consumed, there's no other reality. That's what ultimate Achdus is. Now, I'm not suggesting this is for every person. Every person has to find their way to connect. But you could see from that standard. When it comes la'asid lavim, Mashiach will come. V'niglik v'ed Hashem v'dol kol basa yachdav. 24/7, every fiber of existence will be exuding, will be declaring divine unity. Even Mekir Tizak, even a stone from the wall will cry out about divine godliness. And how do we achieve that? Through our Avodah today. When you and I, in all our activities, we realize they are all meant to be an expressions of godliness in this world. And we have to be a walking ambassador, an agent, that our arms and legs and our very being expresses the divine. That's the expression of Achdus. And that's the ultimate Karev Elecha Dover Ma'ed, that everybody can access it, not just in a time of, as I said, emergency or threat. Because in truth, that divine unity is what defines existence. And all of existence, even though there's a concealment, when we do our Veda, we're transcending that concealment and revealing the divine within. And also denying the opposite approach, that there's an entity outside of it, Elikim Acherim. So Yom Kippur captures very much the themes that we're learning now in Tanya. So this is a good segue to sum up what we learned in chapter 22 and prepare with an introduction as we enter chapter 23. So let's go back to the central themes. And as I said, being that we're literally coming from Yom Kippur and going to Sukkot, these special 4 days, which it says in Svarim, correspond to Yud Kei Vav Kei, the 4 letters of Yud Kei Vav Kei. The day after Yom Kippur is called God's Nomen. The Baal Shem Tov called it. So it's all about expressing that divine unity in our lives. Of course, every mitzvah and every Yom Tov does it in a different form, but Yom Kippur, Achaz B'Shana, captures it in the fullest sense of the word. The Yechida L'Yachdach. So what did we learn? We learned essentially that when you contemplate and come to understand the way existence was created, you come to understand exactly that point. That what? All of existence is God speaking, but in a way that he's calling it speech. Like we learned at the beginning of the chapter in chapter 21, and then chapter 20, mainly chapter 21. What did we learn? And then it continues in chapter 22, that dibur. And that's the word used, dibur. Why? Because the Eibishter wanted that existence should exist, so it couldn't just come from machshava, thought, which is to himself. He wanted something that expresses itself. Dibur expresses, like when I speak, I'm expressing myself to another. In truth, however, Hashem's dibur is all part of his reality. And that's what we need to achieve. So dibur has both elements. It creates something, like he said, ki dibur shel adam, be'emes kachu derech yedidas v'amshachas achayis l'tachtenim b'tzimtzumim ram ba'atzumim. That the truth is, it did create entities that have independent consciousness. How did God do that? Through concealing his presence. To the point that it can allow for something to defy him. Kol kach govru v'atzma tzimtzumim, and the concealment is so intense till it can create things that are impure and so-called separate from him, or feel that they're separate from him. Our job is to retrace the steps and recognize it's not true. That separation is only in our perception. But that perception is a real one. It's not an illusion. So it's about transforming that concealment by us connecting to Elokus. And in chapter 23, he's going to explain this further. He's going to explain how indeed that is an expression of Torah mitzvahs. So you'll see Perek of Gimel, after he finishes explaining what Klippus and Sitra Achra are, how they conceal, he begins, V'im kol anal yuvim v'yavur heitev b'teishus bir, that according to what we've learned in the earlier chapters, we'll understand with additional insight. He says what? What the Zohar says, that Torah and Hashem are completely one. And then the Tikkunim, he said, Pirshu. The Tikkun Zohar explains that Ramach Pikudin Inun Ramach Evorin de Malka, that the 248 positive mitzvahs are the 248 organs of the king. This was cited earlier in chapter 4. Now, before we actually learn this inside, which we'll do in the coming classes, what he's basically coming to lay out here is that's exactly why we were given Torah mitzvahs. Because without Torah mitzvahs, God forbid, what are we left with? Yes, a human being can come to a logical conclusion that we should be ethical and moral and treat each other nicely. But to really manifest, to really draw down divine unity, that all of existence is just an expression of the divine, we need something that is one with the divine. So even though the neshama originates in the divine, but it came down, like I said before, the neshama shenasata b'tahiri, ata barasati etzata, ata nefachta bi, ata meshamra b'kirbi. When the soul comes down, the fact is it gets concealed within the body, within the animal soul. And it has to contend, like we learned earlier, the battle between the divine soul and the animal soul. Comes Torah mitzvahs, gifts that are given to us. Torah is one with Hashem. And mitzvahs are actually evorim, the malka. They're not just things that Hashem does. Now we know it says, Magid Varav Yaakov, Chukav Mishpatav Yisrael, Mashu Mitzav Lacherim Lasa is the Eibishter. What he commands others, he also does. It's not just that the Eibishter does the mitzvahs. It's actually his evorim, Kav Just like a king has limbs, the mitzvahs are Hashem's limbs, so to speak. And I say Kav So when you connect the Torah and mitzvahs, and there is a difference between them as we'll learn throughout this chapter, you're actually finding a way to actually embrace and become one with godliness. Now this was discussed earlier in chapters 4 and 5, But here he's going to discuss it in this context, that all the mitzvahs therefore are an expression of Anechi Hashem Elokecha, of divine unity. That's how we manifest Elokus in our lives. So when you take your hand, as he explains later in the chapter, and Yad Mechalek Tzedakah, and you stretch out your hand to give someone charity, tzedakah, your hand is becoming a merkava, a channel, a vehicle for divine expression, the mitzvah of tzedakah. So the mitzvah itself is a limb. Your limb is becoming an extension of God's limb of chesed. And the same thing with all the mitzvahs. So what we have here is a whole, I don't want to use the word revolutionary, a whole refreshing way of looking at how through Torah and mitzvahs we manifest Achdus Hashem in this world, to the point that there's no room for anything but godliness. And this is going to conclude chapters 23 and then chapter 24, the ideas of Anechi Le'yilecha. And then in chapter 25 is going to wrap it all up together to go back to Korav Elecha Dover Me'ed. So this is the context of what we're learning right now. So we'll actually get into the very chapter in next week's shir. But this is the essential introduction that helps us understand it well. What we come away from this, and especially as I said, we're coming straight from Yom Kippur now. That's why it says, L'kachtem lechem b'yem harishin. So the Medrash says, why b'yem harishin? What's the first day of what? Rishon le'cheshbon ha'avenus. 1 second, but after Yom Kippur we've been forgiven. The Rishon would be the day after Yom Kippur. No. Because the 4 days between Yom Kippur and Sukkot we're completely busy with mitzvahs. Finally, gathering the Dal Minim, building a sukkah. So we're busy, there's no room for anything else. So essentially the unity that we experience, the utter seamless unity on Yom Kippur continues, especially the day after Yom Kippur. So what it means in practical terms is that this is an opportunity for each one of us to ask ourselves, yes, I have a life, you have a parnasa, you have a family, you have many things, many responsibilities. But ultimately, there's one unifying factor. The unified field theory, if you wish, that connects it all, Hashem Echad, the Yochid and Echad of Elokus. And that's something we need to be cognizant of when we come from Achaz B'Shana and we transmit that into the year. The ultimate antithesis to fragmentation and compartmentalization. The thread, the divine thread that connects everything we do. And with that, everyone should have a Gemach Simchat Teva, a year of such utter unity, and we should take a B'Zeicha, V'haya B'yem Ahu, Yeh Hashem Echad, U'Shmo Echad, total unity that permeates all of our existence and all of the world. It should be Shalom in Eretz Yisrael, Shalom is Achdus, Shalom in the whole world, in a true and sustainable and forever way. A Gemach Simchat Teva, and a good Yontif, and a good Gebench to Sukkos, and we'll continue this journey in the next week's class, Tzoi Shabbos. This will be Chol HaMoed, and then continuing week after week. 10 p.m. Eastern Time. Go to TanyaApplied.com where you can find this and all the previous programs. Good Gebench Liyar.
This has been My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Please join us again next week. Visit ChasidusApplied.com for archived classes and more resources.